Welcome to Two Track and Tarmac, a podcast dedicated to the adventure motorcycle rider, the rider who frequents both the street and the trails. To answer the ever-burning question, I wonder where that road goes. I'm your host, Cassie Meyer. I own and operate Clear Moto Motorcycle Rider Training. I've been a professional coach since 2019. My goal with this podcast is to bring a female's perspective to the adventure riding segment, the community, and the industry. The views and opinions expressed on Two Track and Tarmac are those of the talent and guests alone and may not necessarily reflect the official policy or opinion of any organization. The content provided in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. We will discuss motorcycle-related topics, which may include riding suggestions and techniques. Two Track and Tarmac is not responsible for any damages, injuries, or losses that you may experience when acting on your own. In this episode, I want to go into adventure riding with somebody else. Specifically, I want to be highlighting your romantic partner. Now, of course, the relationship that you have with your riding buddy is also important. However, that romantic partner, that's just a different level of how you need to navigate communication, trust, respect out on the trail. So something really cool about sharing adventure riding with your person is that it kind of falls into that extreme sport segment, which means that the emotions are going to be elevated, that the experience is going to be elevated, and sharing both of those things with your partner can intensify and strengthen your bond. However, getting to that place in a really healthful and supportive way takes work. So the first part about all of this is, who are you? Who are you inside of that team element? Who are you in that relationship? And how are you going to show up as the other adventure rider in this adventure riding team? You need to be honest with yourself. Be honest about your personality type, your strengths and your weaknesses, and what it is that you need, the support that you need to be able to be successful out on the trail. Now, touching on the strengths and weaknesses, it's really important to be honest about your weaknesses, but it is not an opportunity for you to wallow in them, right? It's a moment where you get to say, I kind of suck at this thing, but then you need to turn around and you need to highlight and elevate, I am really good at these things though. And that's where hopefully your partner can kind of come in and they can help complement your strengths and they can kind of help fill in where some of that weakness comes in. For example, your strength might be that you're the calm person in the relationship and that you can think through things in a really clear-minded kind of way. But maybe a weakness for you is that you just lack some of that physical strength. And that's where maybe your partner can come into play and they can help on that physical element. And of course, you help by keeping everyone calm. Then when it comes to what it is that you need to be successful, I want you to be really careful with this and don't look at it like, how am I going to have my partner make me successful? Your partner is there to help you get through things, but it's really important for you to understand that you are the only one responsible for making you successful out on the trail. So again, your partner is a support system. They are not your crutch. And something that I like to do just for myself, and that helps to alleviate some of that dependence on my partner, is I want to make sure that I am capable of doing things on the motorcycle on my own. Does that mean that I never ask for help? Of course I ask for help, but I want to be able to lift my motorcycle on my own. I want to be able to move my motorcycle on my own. I want to be able to ride it through tough terrain on my own. Every day, of course, is going to be slightly different. I have absolutely been on rides where I'm like, I am not at my best. I am really struggling mentally and or physically, and I need my person to help me get through it. And they step in, right? My husband comes in and he helps me out, and thank goodness for that. But on most days, I want to be able to get through it. Again, that kind of goes back to that it's an extreme sport, and I like the challenge of it. So that's me. That's the person that I bring to the team, is that I like the challenge. I like to push myself, and I don't need to lean on him all that much. It also helps that, of course, our skill level is pretty darn similar. So it feels even within the team as far as like what we can ride and what we can push ourselves through. So again, be honest with yourself. Who are you and who are you bringing to the team? What are your strengths and weaknesses? And what do you need from your partner to be more successful? Now, I want you to also think about, who is your partner? How are they showing up in the team? How are they going to add their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And how are you going to support them in their weaknesses? How are you going to complement their strengths? And then, of course, again, how are they supporting you and complementing you as well? This is a team, and I want you to think of it that way. Just like any other team that has a number of players on it, each person plays a role inside of that team to have the overarching success for the team. Where this gets a little bit muddy is the romantic part of it. So don't get sucked into the trap of, oh my gosh, they should absolutely be able to read my mind and understand that I'm struggling or understand that I'm frustrated or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is where communication comes into play and how important that communication element is. It is going to touch every element of your adventure riding experience, so don't ignore it. And if anything, adventure riding honestly is probably going to work out some of the kinks in your relationship, because something that it will highlight for you, either on a positive or a negative aspect, is how much do you respect and trust your partner? Because when you're in a pickle and you need help and you don't trust them to help you, that's going to show up in adventure riding. So maybe you add therapy, professional help with that as well to like navigate your relationship, because again, sure, you're out on the trail, but you're also like living with this person and they are your partner in life. And so having that therapy is helpful. However, adventure riding also helps, because you are going to have to learn to work together, or you're just going to end up not riding together. And that's no fun. It's really fun to ride with your person. So here's the deal. All of this is going to take time and exposure for you to get really good at it. For example, my husband and I, as of the day of recording this podcast, we have been riding adventure motorcycles together for almost 7 years. We've been together for 7 years, and we just about started riding adventure motorcycles together. In fact, I bought my first BMW R1250 GS from my husband. And so, yeah, we've been riding adventure motorcycles for 7 years. We have certainly worked through a lot of things, both on and off of the trail, regarding communication and trust and respect. So if you're entering into adventure riding and this is new to you, or the person that you're riding with is new to you and you're both adventure riding, it's just going to take time and exposure for both of you to learn things about yourself and to learn things about one another. You're going to learn how to read one another. You're going to learn how to pick up on your own cues, as well as understanding the overall feel of the team. Are we feeling tense? Are we feeling joyful? Do we need a water break? Being able to read all of those things is super important. You're also going to want to be able to learn how to respond appropriately. And that's where it can get a little bit muddled, where you think maybe you understand what's happening over there, and then you respond in a certain way and it's too much, or maybe it's not enough. For example, adding a little bit of loving pressure, or the pressure was too much. And of course, all of this is bundled up with communication. How well can you communicate? So for example, hey, I feel like you're feeling really tired and maybe we need to take a break. And of course, you might say that and then your person's like, no, I'm fine. I can ride. I'm fine. And then 5 minutes later, they think to themselves, gosh, I am kind of tired and maybe I could take a break, which of course we've all experienced before, is now they're like, I do need to take a break. Next time, you'll be able to understand like, oh, they do need a break. And maybe next time when you offer the break, they'll recognize, I do need to take a break. So that's part of that time and exposure. Ultimately, learning how to communicate and function on these relatively simple levels ultimately is going to help you respond appropriately and communicate effectively when things actually get really tough, when you run into a true emergency situation. Fortunately, thus far, my husband and I have not run into a true emergency yet. We have flirted with it though. And in those moments, we shift gears and we know how to communicate. We know how to activate certain procedures and how to mitigate any further risk so that we can both stay really safe. We know how to do that. And again, we've been doing this for 7 years. And the more we've been riding together, the harder we've ridden together and the more situations we've gotten ourselves into. But we've always managed to get out because we know how to communicate. We understand each other. We understand ourselves. And I can't stress that one enough. You are responsible for you. Even though you're in this team, you are responsible for you. So you have to understand yourself, what it is that you need, all of those things, just like I mentioned at the very beginning. But we've learned how to communicate and how to work through problems together because we have a shared communication, we have shared respect, and we have a shared trust. And maybe part of that is because we have bonded over really hard and challenging things. So again, just understand, this is going to take time and exposure for you to get really good at this. Now, something else to consider is each of yours riding levels. What level does your partner ride at, and what level do you ride at? It's not super common that both partners are going to be at the same level, and that can create a little bit of tension between the two. So it's important here to communicate about the expectations and the perceived expectations, as well as the stories that you're telling yourself. For example, and this is super common, is you're going to have one rider who is at a higher level, and then you'll have the other partner who is at a lower level. And what happens is the higher level rider is going to ride slower, is going to ride easy trails, might feel a little bit bored when they're riding with the other person who's at that lower level. On the other hand, that lower level rider feels like they're riding really hard. They're riding faster than they want. They're outside of their comfort zone. But the story that they're telling themselves is if they don't, then their partner is going to be bored with them and all this stuff. If each person can own their own feeling about it and discuss it with each other, then the expectation can be set. A really great way to navigate this is if you have a rider who's at that lower level and you have a rider who's at that higher level, talk about it and understand, hey, when we ride together, can you just bring it down a little bit? Because I just feel really uncomfortable. That higher level rider is going to be like, sure, I'll do that. That's fine. The trade-off, however, is allow your partner to go then ride with other people so that they can go and ride at a level that is satisfying to them so that they're not always bored, because again, that is going to create that tension. And of course, that lower level rider, as they start to work up and build up their skill, then they'll be able to start riding more and more challenging trails, which of course still might be kind of boring for the higher level rider, but at least it starts to match up time and exposure. It's just going to take time and it's going to take exposure. And something else to, of course, avoid here because of that romantic element is do not assume that the other person can read your mind. It's totally unfair. It's unfair to do it out on the trail, and it's unfair to do in general. So communicate. Hey, I'm feeling way out of my depth here, and I just need to slow down. Can we do that, please? And then if that person who's maybe going a little bit faster hears you and respects you, is going to say, okay, yeah, sure, we can slow down. So it's just about communication, obviously. I feel like I'm going to kind of beat a dead horse about the communication, but I can't stress how important it is to be able to communicate with your person, because adventure riding can absolutely get to a place where it becomes dangerous and it becomes really risky. And if you don't communicate, then it's easy to slide into that dangerous situation. But if you can communicate and communicate effectively, you can avoid slipping into a dangerous situation. Because again, adventure riding can be somewhat classified as an extreme sport. So give it the respect that it deserves, and give your partner the respect that they deserve. And they should give you the respect that you deserve. So speaking of sliding into a dangerous situation, it's also important and critical that the two of you sit down and have a conversation about how each of you regards risk, how you view it, what it looks like, how it feels to you. So that way you can avoid it when it comes to being out on the trail. Generally speaking, usually within this partnership, you're going to have one partner who's like, I don't know, nothing. All danger is fun. And then you're going to have another partner who's like, I don't know about that. And so understanding that about one another is going to help you find that middle ground. Now, it's hard to really find a true middle ground in that situation, because if you have one person who's like, I am a little bit more risk adverse, I really don't want to push the envelope, then unfortunately the person who's like, I don't know, I would jump out of airplanes, they have to bring it way down to match the person who's more nervous. Because as soon as you push that and you get that person who does feel more nervous about risk, you're going to push them too far, and then they're going to end up in a fear situation. And then you got to unravel the fear, and it just ends up being a much messier situation than if you could just dumb it down and not take so many risks. And this is where regarding risk can get funny, because what one person considers risk or dangerous, the other person might just consider it to be adrenaline pumping and exciting and fun. So it could be a really interesting exercise for the two of you to sit down, talk about, hey, I want to discuss how each of us perceives risk and danger when it comes to adventure riding. Then stop having the conversation and sit down, and each of you writes out what you perceive as risky or dangerous out on the trail. Come back together and look at each other's answers. And I think it's nice to do it that way, because when you're having a live conversation, you might in the moment change your answer to please your partner. But if you write it down on a piece of paper, you're just writing it down for you, how you feel. And then you get to look at each other's answers and go, oh, you might find that you're actually more aligned than you initially thought. Or you do need to discuss, like, hey, you think this is fun, I think it's super spooky. And then you navigate that together so that adventure riding ends up being fun and enjoyable for both of you. So that way, when you're out on the trail, you've already talked about what is scary and what is risky and what is dangerous for each of you. So it's easier to see it in real time. For example, when you're out riding, you should be constantly reevaluating for risk and make sure that you don't end up in what's called risk creep, which is where it just very incrementally gets more risky and more risky and risky. So if you're constantly reevaluating for risk and you're checking things like the environment, you're keeping an eye on the weather, you're keeping an eye on how hot it is, you're checking to make sure that your motorcycle is still sound, that your gear's still working properly. And then of course, the most important part is checking in with the human factor, checking in with yourself and checking in with the person. So you're constantly reevaluating for risk, because what can generally happen, again, that risk creep, is sometimes it's not even the environment or the weather, but it's that you're tired or that you're emotionally exhausted. And that can make you a sloppier rider. And if you're a sloppier rider, that just has increased your risk, and you need to keep that in mind. And maybe it's not even you that became tired and exhausted. Maybe it's your partner. And that's also part of that assessment. Continue to assess yourself and assess your person. Communicate, hey, how are you feeling? How are we doing? That way you don't end up in a risky or dangerous situation if you're constantly reassessing. Now, something to do before you're even out on the trail is make sure that both parties in this team, in your romantic adventure riding team, are physically fit and prepared, you're mentally and emotionally prepared, that you understand the pressure to perform out on the trail, and you understand what the safety margins are, which of course is kind of like reassessing the risk management. But if you can mitigate some of that beforehand, making sure that you're physically fit and you're mentally prepared and you're emotionally stable for that day's ride, then it's going to help you perform under that pressure, and it's going to help you stay within your safety margins. Another really big one, though, to help mitigate risk is get training. And of course, I am always going to encourage training, but it really is true. And it's a practical skill to learn how to ride more effectively and more proficiently so that you can also increase your confidence out on the trail. Because if you have the ability to ride out on the trail and you have the confidence to ride out on the trail, you're not going to lean on your partner as much, which frees you both up to ultimately enjoy the adventure ride altogether. So if you can spend the time to go and get the training, to level up, to get the skill, to increase your confidence, I can't think of how any of that is going to be worse for you or for your partner. So go get training. It's worth it. So a few other things that you are going to want to consider when it comes to riding with your partner, and this is true for riding with anybody, whether it's a group or it's a buddy or it's your romantic partner, is how to navigate risk management. And a lot of that is going to happen before you're out on the trail. It's going to happen within conversations and communicating about certain elements of what could happen out on the ride and how to work through those. So creating scenarios and discussing, hey, this is how I would do it, and then discussing how they would do it, can at least give you some practice, in theory at least, give you some practice on how you would deal with a certain situation out on the trail. Because if you end up in that situation in real life on the trail and you've never talked about it, you've never even considered it, you're going to feel like a fish out of water. So one of the first things that you can do, set up a nice meal, have a lovely dinner with your riding partner, and talk about the expectations beforehand. What does each of you expect and want out of the ride and out of each other? And then also talk about how you both want to navigate who takes the lead and who follows in certain situations. For example, if you go back to personality type, if you're the kind of person who is calm and can think clearly, maybe you should be the one who takes the lead. However, if your partner is the one who has the physical strength or is the one that has the higher riding skill, maybe they need to take the lead, and that all depends on the situation that you're in. So it's not fair for you to be in a situation where it does require calmness and thorough troubleshooting for the other person to take the lead if they're the one that's reactive. So that's where that mutual respect and trust comes into play, because if your partner trusts you and they respect you and they understand, okay, this is the time where I need to follow because my partner has the strength in the thing that we need right now, it's going to ultimately set you up for greater success. And then sometimes it's not a true like hard lead and follow situation. Sometimes it is a true partnered situation where you both need to work together on an equal lead and follow situation to get through something that's hard. And that's the beauty about adventure riding, is it will challenge you over and over and over again, constantly, and it'll always be slightly different. You could sit down over this dinner and talk about scenarios, things that you've run into, things that you've seen other people run into, things that you could just imagine could happen out on the trail. But when it actually happens out on the trail, it's just going to be different. But if you have had the opportunity to at least talk about it, you'll have a greater degree of preparedness to navigate as a pair through that situation. And something that you won't be able to do over dinner that you can only see out in real life and out on the trail, and it might not even be on the trail, it could be in different situations, but you can only experience it in real time, is what are your fear signals and what are your partner's fear signals. A really common fear signal is going to be something like breathing really fast and really hard. Another is going to be freezing, absolutely clamming up and not being able to do anything. Lastly is going to be anxiety, and the way that each person expresses their anxiety is going to look different. So having a really good understanding of how you express fear and how your partner express fear is going to help each of you navigate through anything that does challenge you to the point where you are now in a fear response. And unfortunately, when you're in a fear response, it's really hard to get yourself out of a fear response. And that is where your partner does come in, and they do need to help support you and help you break out of whatever is causing you fear. So understanding what you need from your partner in that moment is really important, because sometimes you need a little loving, hard nudge to get past whatever it is that's got you panicked. And sometimes it's removing you from that situation or showing you a tremendous amount of empathy. So whatever it is, you need to understand about your person that they're trying to help you out of that. And then by being able to understand that they're trying to help you should ultimately help you also break out of whatever the fear is. I'm going to slide it in one more time. Training is going to help you reduce fear. Because if you're, for example, afraid of, making hairpin turns, for example. Well, if you learn how to do hairpin turns, then you shouldn't be afraid of them anymore. Things that will probably always cause fear for a lot of people is that moment of like, I don't know how to get out of this. Training, of course, is going to help with that as well. But for me, I've been in situations where I literally am like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. Like, if I cannot get my motorcycle up this hill, I don't know what I'm going to do. And that did create some fear, but I had to work through it. And my husband had to work through it. And on that particular ride, we had another friend with us. And so he was an additional help and support. We did get through it, and we got through it as a team. But boy, howdy, that was a spooky moment, and I was afraid, and I was not riding at my best, and fear really makes a muck of everything. So if you can get the training, if you can get the experience, it will help reduce some of that fear. It will not eliminate it, however. And of course, the more skill that you have, the harder you'll probably start riding, and the more things that you'll come up against, and the more challenges you'll experience. But that's the joy of adventure riding. I mean, that's why we're all here in the first place, right? So get really good at recognizing those fear signals in your partner so that you can help them break out of that fear so that you guys can ride home safely. Now, the other element about fear, however, is as a pair, you should both have a little imaginary veto card, which means that either of you can say, nope, I'm done. I don't want to do this. I'm done. And the other person should have the respect enough for the veto card and for the person who's saying that they're done, have enough respect for them and say, okay, we can be done. However, the veto card is not some magic wand, and it is not going to just bring a helicopter out of thin air and it's going to lift you out of the situation that you're in. It is really important to understand that if you're going to use the veto card, you have to use it before the situation gets too bad. And it's also super unfair to assume that the veto card then means that your partner is saddled with not only their situation, but yours as well. Again, this all goes back to that respect and mutual understanding about what it is that you are doing because you're out adventure riding. Going back to my story of not sure if I was going to be able to get out of that sticky situation when I was riding with my husband and another friend of ours, and we were challenged with this really, really challenging hill. I wanted the hell out of there. Absolutely, I wanted out of there. But I wasn't about to just say, hey, veto card, I want out of this. Like, I understood that I had a responsibility to myself and to the team that I was on that day, which of course is my husband and a friend. I had a responsibility to everyone on that ride. That was an inappropriate time for me to veto. However, oddly enough, my husband and I had discussed the veto card at the very beginning of that ride. And we were like, should we turn back? We ended up not. And it was quite the adventure. So, anywho, communication and having that mutual trust and respect, and just understanding yourself, understanding that you're in an extreme sport, understanding that sometimes you're going to get yourself into situations. It's your responsibility. Your partner is there to help support you. They are not your crutch. However, if you are going to use that veto card, it's probably not a bad idea to debrief with your person why you chose to veto. What was it that pushed you over the edge and made you go, no more today? That way, in the future, you both know how to navigate that better and either avoid having to use the veto card or get you the training that will help you get past the reason that you vetoed. There's a number of different reasons why you may have vetoed, but you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your partner to talk about it and discuss, hey, in the future, this is what I need from this, or this is what I don't need from this. Again, the cool thing about adventure riding and doing this with your romantic partner is, now this can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, but it is going to be a high stress and high emotional experience that you're going to go through together. And it's important to learn how to regulate your stress, how to reduce those tensions, and how to manage your emotions. And the emotional part, again, because of the romantic element of your riding partner also being your husband or your wife or your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whoever that romantic person is for you, the emotional element can be so much more challenging to work through because you assume that that person is supposed to know you, they're supposed to understand you, they're supposed to be able to respond to you without you saying anything. And that's a trap. So learn how to manage the stress and the tension and your emotions in yourself, as well as helping your person work through the same things also. Because having tempers flare and emotions get out of control out on the trail is not going to make you a better and stronger rider after that moment. I promise you, it doesn't work that way. So something that can help with some of the frustration that one or both of you is feeling is to pursue individual pursuits regarding adventure riding. So for example, you might really want some training. Your partner should support you in that. And maybe your partner really wants to go ride with their buddies. You should support them in that. So be really careful not to become overly dependent on one another. It's not fun to constantly have your partner leaning on you and needing you to be able to go out and adventure ride. And it's not fun if your partner is also constantly asking you to ride harder and more challenging because they need more stimulants. So strike the balance and allow each of you to pursue your own passion within adventure riding, because then that will allow space for both of you to come back together and enjoy it as a pair. And of course, the beauty of both of you being adventure riders is that you have a shared understanding of the sport, which should hopefully help you support one another's individual pursuits. The other thing to be really careful of is to not be too much of a worrywart. Now, I think that there is some degree of appropriate worry and concern for safety. However, if you're doing it too much, or you're doing it to hold that person back, or your person is doing it to hold you back, that in and of itself is going to cause tension and frustration between both of you. And again, I think that over worriness is usually a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding. So for example, it could happen even if you're both adventure riders, but let's say one rider is a higher level rider and the other one is maybe just starting out. Well, the person just starting out doesn't understand this higher level riding, and it could freak them out because they're just worried about trying not to fall over, where the higher level rider is like, I'm climbing mountains on my motorcycle. So I think if you can communicate about any of those potential tensions and frustrations and help educate the other person, and it's not a bad idea to have someone else educate your person. It's not always great for your romantic partner to tell you how it is. We've all experienced that in so many different ways in our lives. So this is where you can also hire a professional. So you can hire a professional either as a guide, so you could join a tour company and go on an extended day ride with your partner. And that will, of course, eliminate some of that need to communicate about who's going to be the lead and who's going to follow and all those other elements. It gives the couple the opportunity to go through the time and go through the exposure with the help of a professional who's putting it all together for you. You, of course, can also hire a trainer, and they do the same thing. Granted, they're teaching you skills instead of just taking you out on a ride. But that can be a really nice thing for couples to go through as well, because you're separating it and you've got someone who's outside of the partnership and outside of that relationship that can speak to one or both people in the team, which personally for myself as a coach, I have actually seen dynamics shift a little bit as the rider who has less skill starts to build their skill and their confidence starts to inflate. It's really cool to see how the partner that has the higher riding skill now views their partner who is building their skill, because at that point, both parties are committed to the success of the team as a whole. Now, a few things that you could do to ensure the overall success of your adventure riding partnership with your romantic partner is to strike the balance. You're going to want to strike that balance based on each other's riding levels. You want to strike the balance on supporting each other and complementing each other instead of using one another as a crutch. And ultimately, you want to strengthen your communication, how much respect and how much trust you have for one another. Another really important element is just don't become overly dependent on your person. Nobody likes to be smothered. Maybe your dog likes to be smothered, but generally speaking, smothering can happen on the couch. It does not need to happen out on the trail. So just do not become overly dependent on the other person for your ultimate success. It's important that you take responsibility for yourself and you build up your own skill, that you build up your own confidence so that you can be a part of the team instead of a weight on the team. And then lastly, but most important, is just communication. So to have success, you have to be able to communicate. You have to communicate about how you're feeling. You need to be able to communicate with your partner if you're seeing something come up, and how to be able to just get through high tension, high emotional situations out on the trail together. So of course, as always, regarding this episode all about adventure riding with your romantic partner, I want to know, what is maybe the hardest thing but most successful thing that you've ever been through with your riding partner? How did you both navigate that? How did you both show up in the team? And what were the keys to your overall success? I do love hearing about those stories because everyone's going to navigate something differently, and those teams are going to navigate things differently. So thank you so much for sharing down in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for listening to Two Track and Tarmac, my podcast dedicated to you, the adventure motorcycle rider. If you are enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing and sharing it with a friend. If you're interested in even more motorcycle rider content, such as training videos, tutorials, and my monthly newsletter, you can subscribe to the Clear Moto Patreon page. You can find the link for that down in the show notes below. Your support through both the podcast and through Patreon allows me to keep doing what I enjoy doing so much, which is sharing my motorcycle knowledge with you. Again, thank you so much for listening to Two Track and Tarmac, and I hope to have you in the next one.